Death was not an end, but a gateway. Across the ancient world, cultures perfected incredible sciences to cheat decay, preserving their dead for eternity. This is the global story of mummification, a practice far richer and more mysterious than the linen-wrapped pharaohs of Egypt. You are about to discover the astonishing rituals and ingenious methods used from the icy peaks of the Andes to the swampy bogs of northern Europe. By the end of our journey, you will see these timeless figures not as monsters, but as windows into humanity's deepest beliefs about life, death, and what lies beyond. Why would a society disassemble a body only to rebuild it with sticks and clay? What dark secrets are locked within the skin of a man preserved in a peat bog for 2,000 years? The answers will reshape your understanding of the past. What does our own desire to remember the dead say about us today? A body was far more than mere flesh and bone. It was the spiritual anchor of a person, the one thing the soul could not afford to lose. To understand why cultures across the globe went to such incredible lengths to preserve their dead, you must step into their worldview where death was merely a transition, not an ending. For the ancient Egyptians, this belief was absolute. They saw a person as a collection of spiritual elements with a ka or life force needing a physical home to return to. Without a preserved body, the ka would be lost and the soul's journey to the afterlife would fail. Mummification was therefore a sacred act of creation, building an eternal vessel to house the spirit for all time. Far across the world, high in the Andes, the Inca held a similar yet distinct conviction. For them, death did not sever a person's connection to their community. A mummified ancestor known as a malqui remained a living presence. These ancestors were cared for, brought out for ceremonies, and even consulted for advice. Their preserved bodies were a direct link to the divine, ensuring the fertility of the land and the continuation of the lineage. The body's preservation guaranteed the ancestors' ongoing role in the world of the living. Meanwhile, in ancient China, the drive for preservation reached its zenith with the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. His quest was not just for an afterlife, but for literal immortality. He believed that a perfectly preserved body, surrounded by every earthly comfort and protected by a terracotta army, would allow him to rule forever in the next world. In every case, from the Nile to the mountains of Peru, the physical form was the key that unlocked eternity. The meticulous care taken with the dead was a profound declaration of faith. It ensured the spirit's comfort, maintained a bridge between generations, and fulfilled a cosmic duty. The methods they developed then were not morbid experiments, but acts of love, reverence, and deep spiritual necessity. How did they achieve such miraculous preservation without modern technology? The answers lie in a breathtaking blend of ritual and raw environmental power. The Egyptian process was a meticulous 70-day ritual, a sacred operation to transform a perishable body into an eternal vessel. It began not with reverence, but with a startlingly practical procedure. A long, hooked rod made of bronze or reed was inserted through the corpse's nostril, carefully breaking the delicate ethmoid bone to reach the cranial cavity. The brain was then liquefied and meticulously pulled out piece by piece through the nose. This organ, curiously, was considered unimportant, almost useless, and was unceremoniously discarded. Next came the crucial step of evisceration. A priest known as the slitter would make a precise incision on the left side of the abdomen. Through this opening, he would remove the stomach, the liver, the lungs, and the intestines. Each of these organs was individually dehydrated and then lovingly placed into special containers known as canopic jars. These jars were guarded by 4 protective deities, each watching over a specific organ for all of eternity. Yet one vital organ was always left carefully in place, the heart. The Egyptians believed the heart was the core of a person's being, the seat of their intellect, their emotions, and their very soul. It would be essential for the final judgment in the afterlife. With the organs removed, the body was ready for its most transformative stage, dehydration. It was completely covered inside and out with a type of salt called natron. This was not ordinary table salt, but a naturally occurring mixture harvested from dry lake beds, perfect for drawing out every drop of moisture from the tissues. The body would lie in this natron bed for 40 days, slowly drying out until it was a lean, leathery shell of its former self, perfectly preserved and immune to the bacteria that cause decay. After this, the desiccated body was cleaned with palm wine and spices, then packed with dry materials like sawdust or linen to restore a more lifelike shape. The final act was an intricate ceremony of wrapping that could take 2 weeks or more. Dozens of priests would work in unison, swathing the body in hundreds of yards of fine linen strips. This was far more than just bundling. It was a form of spiritual armor. Dozens of magical amulets, small charms made of precious stones and gold, were strategically placed between the linen layers. A scarab beetle amulet was positioned over the heart, a pair of eyes on the side of the head, all intended to protect and empower the spirit in the next world. Every fold of linen, every spoken prayer was a stitch in the creation of an indestructible vessel, a masterpiece of preservation designed to last for millennia. But this sacred science was not reserved for pharaohs alone. For a price, the promise of eternity was available to nearly anyone in Egyptian society. The grand workshops, known as the Houses of Beauty, operated like a massive, ritualized industry. Here, teams of specialized priests worked not on a single body, but on a constant stream of the deceased, each receiving a level of care dictated entirely by their family's wealth. For the elite, the process was the gold standard we often envision. Their bodies were transformed into masterpieces, encased in intricately painted cartonnage and nestled within nested anthropoid coffins. The most powerful pharaohs were sheathed in solid gold, their faces immortalized behind gleaming masks, becoming literal gods of the underworld. Yet for the vast middle class, a more affordable option existed. This budget mummification was a stripped-down version of the grand ritual. Instead of the meticulous 70-day process, it might be completed in just a few weeks. The most telling shortcut involved the internal organs. Rather than the careful evisceration by a slitter priest, a common technique was to inject a liquid resin or even cedar oil into the body cavity. This harsh substance would liquefy the organs, which were then simply drained out. The body was then packed with natron for a shorter drying period before being wrapped in simpler linen. The result was a mummy, yes, but one far more susceptible to decay over the centuries. The difference in quality was stark, a direct reflection of one's earthly status projected into the afterlife. This entire economy of death was managed by the priesthood, who were not just spiritual guides but also skilled artisans and shrewd businessmen. They offered a range of packages, from the full divine transformation to a basic preservation guarantee. The demand for these services was so immense that it fueled trades in linen harvesting, natron mining, carpentry for coffins, and jewelry making for amulets. A person's entire life savings could be spent on this final, crucial journey. This was not a morbid obsession with death, but a vibrant, integral part of Egyptian life, a massive industrial and spiritual engine that ensured society's connection to the gods and the eternal cycle of existence. But the Egyptians were not the only civilization to master the art of preservation using the very world around them. While the Egyptians built eternal vessels through ritual, nature itself was quietly crafting its own masterpieces of preservation. Across the globe, some of the most astonishing mummies were not the result of careful human effort, but of pure environmental accident. These are the accidental mummies, preserved for millennia by the very ground they walked on or the air they breathed. In places of extreme cold, absolute dryness, or unusual chemistry, the normal process of decay simply stops. Bacteria cannot thrive, moisture is absent, and a body can remain suspended in time, offering us an uncanny, intimate snapshot of a life frozen in a single moment. The science behind this natural mummification is as brilliant as it is brutal. In the hyper-arid deserts of Peru, for instance, the conditions are so perfectly dry that a body can be desiccated almost instantly. The relentless sun and the parched, salty sand act like a massive, open-air version of the Egyptian's natron, pulling all moisture from the tissues before decay can even begin. The result is not a wrapped and amulet-filled figure, but a leathery, sun-darkened form, often curled in a fetal position, with every strand of hair and detail of tattooed skin preserved in stunning clarity. Far to the north, a completely different mechanism takes over. On the frozen tundra of Siberia, the deep cold creates a perpetual freezer. A body interred in the permafrost, the permanently frozen layer of soil, undergoes a process of natural freeze-drying. The intense cold halts all bacterial activity, and over centuries, the frozen moisture within the tissues sublimates, turning directly from ice to vapor. This leaves behind a body that is incredibly light and fragile, yet retains the face of a person who lived thousands of years ago, their expressions and clothing perfectly intact. Perhaps the most mysterious environment of all is the peat bog. Found across northern Europe, these waterlogged, spongy grounds are deceptively tranquil. They are profoundly acidic and crucially devoid of oxygen. When a body sinks into a bog, the tannins from the decaying plant matter act as a natural tanning agent, turning the skin to a dark, leathery consistency. The acidity dissolves the bones, but it perfectly pickles the skin, the hair, and even the contents of the stomach. A bog body looks less like a skeleton and more like a haunting, dark leather statue of a human being, often with a peaceful expression that belies their ancient fate. In each of these cases, nature provided the perfect, unforgiving laboratory. These accidental mummies were not prepared for an afterlife journey, yet they have traveled further through time than anyone could have dreamed. They are time capsules sealed not by human hands but by the planet itself. What stories could these naturally preserved individuals tell if they could speak? The answer lies not in written records, but in the silent, astonishing details still etched into their very skin. Long before the first pyramids even shadowed the Egyptian desert, another culture had already unlocked the secrets of eternity. On the stark, arid coast of what is now Chile and Peru, the Chinchorro people were performing the world's oldest known mummifications. Their story begins over 7,000 years ago, a staggering 2 millennia before the first Egyptian attempts. But their methods were not born of royal decree or a quest for godhood. They were acts of profound communal love. The Chinchorro did not merely preserve their dead, they completely remade them. The process was astonishingly complex and deeply intimate. A body would be carefully disassembled. The skin and muscles were removed, and the skeleton was meticulously reinforced with sticks for structural support. The body cavity was then stuffed with natural fibers, clay, and feathers. Once reassembled, the entire form was covered in a thick paste of ash and clay, creating a new, durable skin. The final touch was a layer of paint, often a glossy black made from manganese or a vibrant red from ochre. Some even had simple clay masks for faces. This was not a rushed burial, but the creation of a permanent, tangible ancestor, a work of art meant to remain with the living. What makes the Chinchorro truly unique, however, is who they mummified. This elaborate, weeks-long process was not reserved for chiefs or elders. It was applied to everyone. Archaeologists have discovered these ancient masterpieces belonging to men, women, and most poignantly to tiny children and even fetuses. This suggests a powerful, egalitarian belief system. For the Chinchorro, the right to a physical eternity, to be remade and remembered, was a universal human right, not a privilege bought with wealth or power. Their mummies were not hidden away in tombs, but were kept within the community, present in daily life, a constant and comforting connection to those who had passed on. This changes the entire narrative of mummification. It began not as a tool for the elite, but as a heartfelt expression of grief, memory, and the unbreakable bonds of family. 500 years ago, a young girl walked higher than any eagle flies. Her journey ended at the summit of Mount Ampoto in Peru, at a lung-crushing altitude of over 20,000 feet. There, in the thin, frozen air, she was given a ritual drink, and then, as an offering to the mountain gods, she met her end. The ice immediately claimed her, cradling her body in a perfect deep freeze. She remained there, a silent secret of the Andes, until 1995, when the nearby volcano Sabancaya stirred to life. Its heat melted the cap of ice that had been her tomb for 5 centuries, and her body, wrapped in a colorful blanket, tumbled down the mountainside where she was discovered by the anthropologist Johann Reinhardt. He named her Juanita, the Inca Ice Maiden. She was not a victim of a tragic accident, but a central figure in a sacred rite known as the Capacocha. This was the ultimate offering to the gods, a sacrifice intended to maintain the cosmic order of the Inca Empire. The children chosen for this honor were not taken from poor families, but were the children of nobility, raised in comfort and health for this very purpose. Analysis of Juanita's remains showed she was well-nourished and about 12 to 15 years old. Her status was confirmed by the exquisite artifacts buried with her. She was accompanied by small, intricately crafted figurines of gold, silver, and spondylus shell, dressed in fine, elaborate clothing, and her head was adorned with a feather from a tropical bird, a rare item that had traveled a great distance. Every detail of her burial was a message to the gods, a display of the empire's wealth and devotion. The Capacocha was not an act of cruelty, but one of profound spiritual significance. The sacrifice of a perfect, high-status child was believed to appease the mountain deities or apus, who controlled the weather, the water, and the very fertility of the land. A successful offering ensured rain for crops, prevented natural disasters, and secured the stability of the empire. Juanita, in her frozen sanctuary, was a bridge between the world of the Inca and the divine. Her preservation is so perfect that scientists can still determine her last meal and see the peaceful, determined expression on her face. She is a time capsule from the very peak of Inca power, a silent witness to a belief system so powerful it could command a journey to the roof of the world. What other secrets do these frozen summits hold? The discovery of Juanita was only the beginning, opening a window into a practice that spanned the entire empire. Deep within the blistering heart of the Taklamakan Desert lies a mystery that unravels the map of the ancient world. The Tarim mummies discovered in western China present a sight that stopped historians in their tracks. Their faces are not what anyone expected to find. They are distinctly Caucasian with tall frames, long noses, and hair ranging from fiery red to bright blonde, all perfectly preserved for nearly 4,000 years. The hyper-arid, salty desert acted like a natural museum, freeze-framing these individuals in a state of breathtaking clarity. They do not look like silent figures from early Chinese history. They look like they could have walked straight out of Central Europe. One of the most famous, known as the Churchin Man, was buried around 1000 BC. He stands over 6 feet tall with a long nose and a head of reddish-brown hair. Beside him, the beauty of Lulan, a woman who died around 1800 BC, has delicate European features and fine, light brown hair. Their clothing is just as astonishing, woven from richly colored wool in sophisticated plaids and patterns that feel strangely familiar, yet were found in a place they simply should not have been. This discovery sparked a profound historical puzzle. How did a community of clearly Western people come to live and die in what is now Western China, centuries before the official Silk Road trade routes were ever established? The Silk Road, that famous network of trade, did not become a major thoroughfare until the 2nd century BC. These mummies predated by 1,000 years or more. Their presence suggests that long-distance travel and cultural exchange were happening on a scale we never before imagined. They were not isolated travelers, but an established population with their own unique culture and burial practices. Were they nomadic herders from the steppes of Siberia? Were they traders from the distant Black Sea region who slowly migrated eastward over generations? Genetic testing has only deepened the intrigue, confirming their Western Eurasian origins. These individuals were not just passing through, they put down roots in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, thriving in the harsh desert for centuries. The Tarim mummies are more than just preserved bodies. They are living proof that the ancient world was far more interconnected than our history books often tell us. They force us to redraw the lines of early human migration, showing that bold explorers and settlers crossed vast continents, carrying their fashions, their genes, and their lives into the heart of an unknown land. What other secrets of early global connection are still buried beneath the sands, waiting for the desert to give them up? The windswept wetlands of northern Europe hold a different kind of secret, one preserved not by sand or ice, but by the dark, tea-colored water of peat bogs. Here, the chemistry of the earth itself performs a strange and selective magic. A body laid to rest in a bog sinks into a world devoid of oxygen, a place where the normal bacteria of decay cannot survive. The cold, acidic water, steeped with tannins from decaying sphagnum moss, acts as a powerful tanning agent, slowly curing the skin and turning it to a supple, dark leather. Yet in the same process, the very acidity that preserves the skin meticulously dissolves the skeleton, leaving behind a person without bones, a hauntingly detailed leather mask of a human being. The most famous of these figures, like Tollund man from Denmark, offer an almost unnerving intimacy. When he was pulled from the peat in 1950, his face was so perfectly preserved that the finders believed they had discovered a recent murder victim. You can see the stubble on his chin, the gentle lines around his eyes, and the simple leather cap still on his head. His expression is one of profound peace, a stark contrast to the braided leather noose still tied around his neck. Another, Gråbell man, lies with his hair matted by the bog and his hands showing no signs of labor, suggesting he was not a common farmer. Scientists could even analyze his last meal, a gruel made of grains and seeds, eaten perhaps as a final ritual. The evidence points to a dark and deliberate end. These men were not lost or accidentally drowned. The nooses, the violent injuries, and their careful placement in the bog all suggest they were offerings. They may have been victims of ritual sacrifice given to the gods of the marsh in exchange for fertility or a good harvest, or they may have been criminals punished for unspeakable crimes. Either way, the bog did not just preserve their bodies, it captured the very moment of their passing, freezing them in a state between life and death, a permanent testament to the beliefs and the brutal justice of Iron Age Europe. Far out in the Atlantic Ocean, on the volcanic islands known as the Canaries, a unique tradition of mummification flourished in complete isolation. The Guanches, the indigenous people of these islands, developed their own complex methods entirely separate from the practices in Egypt or Peru. Their process was a testament to human ingenuity, born from the specific resources and beliefs of their island home. When a person died, the Guanches would begin by carefully removing the internal organs and brain. They would then thoroughly wash the body cavity with a mixture of salt water and special herbs, a natural cleansing and disinfecting ritual. The next step was dehydration. The body was either laid out to dry under the powerful sun or, in a more controlled method, slowly smoked over a gentle fire. This painstaking process could take up to 2 weeks, transforming the body into a light, preserved shell. Once fully dried, the final act was wrapping. The mummy was not swathed in linen, but carefully enveloped in layers of goat or sheep skin, sewn tightly to create a durable, leathery bundle. These sacred bundles were then transported to the most remote and inaccessible places on the islands, often hidden deep within labyrinthine cave systems high in the mountains. Here, sheltered from the elements, the mummies of the Guanche ancestors would rest for centuries, guardians of a forgotten world. This entire culture was shattered with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors in the 15th century. The conquest was brutal, and the Spanish, viewing the Guanche practices as pagan, systematically worked to eradicate their rituals, including mummification. Within a few generations, the knowledge was lost and the caves were forgotten. It was only centuries later that archaeologists began to rediscover these hidden tombs. Modern science has since given the Guanche mummies a voice. Analysis of their skin and bones reveals a people who are surprisingly tall and robust, with a diet rich in barley, goat meat, and foraged plants. They suffered from arthritis and dental problems just like us, but their isolation also meant they were free from many of the contagious diseases that plagued the mainland. Most strikingly, genetic studies confirm that the Guanches were descended from Berber peoples of North Africa, who must have braved the open ocean in simple boats thousands of years ago. Their mummies are not just preserved bodies, they are the last witnesses of a civilization that thrived in solitude, developing a sacred science of eternity all their own, only to have it vanish beneath the tide of history. In a quiet monastery in Sicily, a different kind of mausoleum challenges our very definition of a resting place. The Capuchin catacombs of Palermo are not a hidden tomb, but a sprawling public gallery of the dead, a community that refused to let go. From the 16th century until 1920, this was the final destination for the city's elite, a place where thousands were naturally mummified and put on permanent display. The process was surprisingly simple, a stark contrast to the elaborate rituals of ancient Egypt. When a person died, their body was placed in one of the monastery's special dehydration cells, small, ventilated rooms where the dry air would slowly desiccate the tissues over a period of about 8 months to a year. Once the natural mummification was complete, the remains were washed with vinegar to disinfect them, and then dressed in their finest attire. The result was not a wrapped and anonymous bundle, but a recognizable individual, posed as if in a silent conversation with the living. You do not find chaotic piles of bones here, you find order. The corridors are meticulously arranged by profession, by status, and by gender. There is a hallway for monks, their desiccated forms still cloaked in humble brown robes. A corridor for noblewomen is filled with figures in the elegant silk and lace dresses of their era, their posed hands still clutching faded prayers. Another section is dedicated to professional men, lawyers and doctors standing in their formal wear. One of the most poignant figures is a small girl, Rosalia Lombardo, who died in 1920 at just 2 years old. She rests in a glass-topped coffin, her preservation so perfect she seems only to be sleeping, a heartbreaking snapshot of loss frozen in time. This was not an act of morbid curiosity, but a profound cultural expression. For the people of Palermo, this was a way to memorialize their loved ones, to keep them physically present and integrated within the fabric of their community. It was a declaration that death did not mean disappearance. To walk these halls is to witness a centuries-long conversation between the living and the dead, a haunting testament to the human desire to hold on, to remember, and to look our own mortality directly in the face. Across the Atlantic, in the vibrant, rainforested cities of the Maya and the towering temples of the Aztecs, the approach to the dead was strikingly different. Here, the goal was not a perfectly intact body for the soul's return, but a powerful transformation tied to the relentless cycles of nature. Mummification was partial, selective, and deeply symbolic. For the elite, the journey might begin with the body being carefully smoked over a slow fire or treated with sacred resins and oils. This was not the comprehensive preservation of an Egyptian pharaoh, but a focused effort to stave off decay just long enough for the elaborate funerary rites to be completed. The body was a temporary vessel, and the focus quickly shifted to what lay beneath. The true object of veneration was often the skull. In a practice that might seem startling today, the skulls of revered ancestors, particularly great warriors or wise leaders, were sometimes meticulously defleshed. They were not hidden away in shame, but transformed into sacred objects. These cleaned, polished skulls might be intricately decorated with jade, turquoise, or other precious stones, or painted with symbolic design. They were then displayed in household shrines or even carried into battle as powerful talismans. This was not an act of desecration, but one of the highest honor. By keeping the skull of an ancestor close, the living maintained a direct physical connection to their wisdom and strength, drawing upon their power for generations. For common people, the rituals were far simpler, yet no less meaningful. Their bodies were often carefully wrapped into tight bundles, curled into a seated fetal position. This posture was profoundly symbolic, mirroring the position of a baby in the womb. It represented a core belief held across Mesoamerica, the idea of cyclical death and rebirth. Just as a seed must die in the earth to become a new plant, a human's death was merely a return to the cosmic womb, a necessary step before a new beginning. Whether a decorated skull on a shrine or a bundled body in a crypt, the treatment of the dead was a constant physical reminder of this cycle. The flesh might decay, but the bones endured, and in those bones resided the enduring essence of the ancestor, forever woven into the fabric of the living world. How do these practices, so focused on transformation rather than preservation, reflect a different understanding of eternity itself? The desire for a physical eternity could also turn inward, demanding a willpower beyond anything we might comprehend. In the misty, cedar-covered mountains of Japan, a small group of Buddhist monks pursued a path to immortality so extreme it borders on the unimaginable. They sought to become Sokushinbutsu, living Buddhas, through a ritual of self-mummification that was as much a spiritual journey as a physical one. This was not a process done to the dead, but a final, profound act of meditation performed by the living. For 3,000 days, nearly a decade, a monk would embark on a brutally strict diet designed to strip his body of every trace of fat and moisture. He would exist only on nuts, seeds, and the resinous roots of trees, slowly transforming his own body into a vessel unsuitable for decay. The goal was to eliminate anything that bacteria could feed on, turning his flesh into a natural mummy from the inside out. This was only the first preparatory phase of the sacrifice. When the monk felt his time was near, he would enter the final stage. With his body already pared down to its barest essence, he would be sealed inside a stone tomb, just large enough for him to sit in the lotus position. A small bamboo air tube was his only connection to the outside world, and he held a bell. Each day, he would ring that bell to signal to his followers that he was still alive, still meditating in the absolute darkness. The ringing was a countdown to his own transcendence. When the bell finally fell silent, the air tube was removed and the tomb was sealed completely. His followers would then wait for another 1,000 days before breaking open the tomb. If the body was found perfectly preserved, the monk was revered as a true Sokushinbutsu, a living Buddha who had achieved enlightenment not in spite of his physical form, but through its ultimate mastery. This was the highest spiritual achievement, a testament to a discipline that conquered the very processes of nature. To these monks, the perfectly preserved body was not a relic, but the final proof of an indomitable spirit. Every single one of us is engaged in a quiet, constant battle with an invisible world. From the moment life ends, a race against time begins, a race between decay and preservation. To truly grasp the genius of the mummies we have met, you need to understand the science of this race, the fundamental rules that govern what happens to a body after death. Decomposition is nature's relentless recycling program. It is driven by two primary forces, the enzymes within our own cells, which begin to break down tissues almost immediately, and the vast armies of bacteria that live inside us. These microorganisms, which were once helpful partners in digestion, suddenly become agents of dissolution, consuming the body from the inside out. This process requires three key ingredients to thrive: warmth, oxygen, and most importantly, moisture. Water is the lifeblood of decay. Remove it and the entire process grinds to a halt. This is the single most important principle behind mummification. Think about salting a piece of meat to make jerky or hanging fish in the smoke of a fire. You are not cooking it, you are drawing out every single drop of water. Without that moisture, the bacteria simply cannot survive. The body does not rot, it simply dries out, preserved in a state of suspended animation. This is the essence of desiccation, and it is exactly what the Egyptians achieved with their natron beds, what the Guanches accomplished with sun and smoke, and what the desert sands of Peru and China performed naturally. But what about places that are cold and wet? Here, a different strategy takes over. In the oxygen-starved, highly acidic environment of a peat bog, the chemistry changes completely. The tannins from the moss act as a natural disinfectant, poisoning the bacteria that cause decay. It is a form of natural pickling, much like submerging a cucumber in vinegar to create a sour pickle. The acid preserves the skin and hair perfectly, while it slowly dissolves the bone. And in the ultimate deep freeze, the icy peaks of the Andes or the Siberian permafrost, a third method dominates. Extreme cold does not remove moisture, it simply locks it in place as solid ice. It puts all biological activity on permanent pause. The bacteria are still there, but they are frozen in time, completely unable to function. It is like hitting the pause button on a movie. The action stops exactly where it is. Whether by stealing water, creating a toxic bath, or plunging into a deep freeze, every successful mummification method, whether by human design or natural accident, finds a way to break the chain of decay. Knowing this, the ancient practices we have explored transform from mysterious rituals into brilliant, applied science. They were manipulating the very building blocks of nature to achieve a sacred goal. With this foundation of how preservation works, we can now ask an even bigger question. What can these timeless individuals actually tell us about the worlds they left behind? These ancient bodies hold their secrets tightly, but modern science has learned how to listen. The tools of investigation have transformed from the unwrapping parties of the Victorian era into a digital archaeology that respects the integrity of the mummy itself. Today, we can look inside a linen-wrapped bundle without ever touching a single fold, using the same technology found in a hospital. The computed tomography scan, or CT scan, is like a magical knife that never cuts. It takes thousands of X-ray images from every angle, and a computer then assembles them into a perfect three-dimensional model of the body within. We can rotate this digital body, peel back its virtual layers, and explore it from every possible perspective. This has revealed astonishing details. We can see healed fractures from a long-forgotten fall, the telltale signs of arthritis in the spine, and the devastating damage left by ancient diseases. We can even spot the mistakes of the embalmers, the broken nose from a clumsy hook, or the ceremonial tools accidentally left inside the body cavity. One of the most profound discoveries came from scanning the arteries of Egyptian mummies. Researchers found clear evidence of atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries that we often call a modern disease of sedentary lifestyles. These ancient individuals who lived without processed foods or cigarettes still developed the same plaque in their blood vessels, forcing us to rethink the very history of heart disease. For smaller, more targeted investigations, scientists turn to endoscopy. A flexible tube with a tiny camera on the end, an endoscope, can be gently threaded through a natural opening or a small existing tear in the wrapping. This allows researchers to see the condition of the internal tissues up close and even take minute samples for further testing. It is keyhole surgery on a patient who has been dead for thousands of years. But perhaps the most revolutionary tool is the analysis of ancient DNA. From a single bone fragment or a tiny tissue sample, geneticists can now read the biological story of a person. They can trace their ancestry across continents, confirming, for instance, the Western origins of the Tarim mummies. They can reconstruct entire family trees, identifying the royal relationships between pharaohs buried in the same valley. They can even discover which diseases a person was genetically predisposed to and sometimes identify the actual pathogens that killed them. The famous Iceman Ötzi is a perfect example of this powerful synergy. CT scans showed an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder, a fatal injury, but DNA analysis of his blood revealed he had been in a fight shortly before his death, with the blood of 2 other people found on his weapons and clothing. He also had the stomach bacterium H. pylori, and his last meal was of ibex and wild grains. Science did not just reveal his cause of death, it reconstructed the final, violent days of his life. These non-invasive techniques have turned every mummy into an open book. We are no longer just observers of the dead, we are becoming their biographers, reading the stories written in their bones, their cells, and their very DNA. And with these powerful new ways of seeing, we are now asking questions that go far beyond any single individual, uncovering truths about the rise and fall of entire civilizations. The legend of the mummy's curse is one of archaeology's most enduring tales, fueled by a perfect storm of media hype and tragic coincidence. It all erupted with the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. As the world marveled at the treasures within, a series of unfortunate deaths among the excavation team sparked a global frenzy. The most famous victim was the expedition's financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, who died from an infected mosquito bite mere months after entering the tomb. Newspapers at the time sensationalized a supposed inscription found at the tomb's entrance, a dramatic warning that death would come on swift wings to those who disturbed the pharaoh's rest. The public was captivated and a Hollywood legend was born, yet the truth is far more fascinating than the fiction. There was no such curse inscribed on Tutankhamun's tomb. The story was a complete fabrication by journalists, so what really happened to Lord Carnarvon and the others? Modern science offers a compelling explanation. Sealed for over 3,000 years, the tomb was a perfect breeding ground for ancient bacteria and potentially toxic molds. One leading theory points to a fungus known as Aspergillus niger, which can thrive in dark, enclosed spaces like a burial chamber. When the tomb was opened, these microscopic spores were stirred into the air, inhaled by individuals whose immune systems were perhaps already weakened. They could have caused severe, even fatal, respiratory infections. This was not a supernatural curse, but a very natural biological hazard. Furthermore, when you track the actual lifespans of everyone present at the opening, the curse narrative completely falls apart. The most important person there, the archaeologist Howard Carter, lived for nearly 17 more years, dying of natural causes at an advanced age. The idea of a curse was simply a powerful coincidence, amplified by a press eager for a sensational story. The real Egyptian curses were something entirely different. Protective spells and warnings were indeed sometimes placed on tomb walls or on figurines, but their purpose was spiritual defense. They were meant to guard the deceased from evil spirits or demonic forces that might threaten their peaceful journey in the afterlife. A typical curse might threaten a divine punishment against any evil being that tried to desecrate the tomb, but it was never intended to harm the living. The true curse was the violation of a sacred, eternal rest. So the next time you see a movie with a reanimated mummy stalking explorers, remember the real story. The danger was not in a pharaoh's vengeance, but in the unseen, ancient world they left behind. But the reverence for these preserved bodies was not always guaranteed. Across Europe, a strange and unsettling transformation occurred, turning sacred Egyptian relics into a common ingredient in the medicine cabinet. For centuries, a substance known as mummia was one of the most sought-after remedies in European apothecaries. This was not a metaphorical name, it was literal ground-up mummy. The belief was that the bitumen, or natural asphalt, sometimes seen on mummies, contained the very life force of the preserved individual, a potent substance that could cure ailments in the living. It was prescribed for everything from bruises and headaches to internal bleeding and stomach ailments. A wealthy patient might be given a sliver of blackened flesh to swallow or a powder to mix into their wine. This created a voracious demand that spanned from the Middle Ages right into the Victorian era. But the supply of genuine ancient Egyptian mummies was, of course, severely limited. To meet the booming market, a gruesome and fraudulent industry was born. Unscrupulous merchants began creating fake mummies. They would take the bodies of executed criminals, dead peasants, or even recently deceased travelers and subject them to a crude preservation process. These bodies were buried in sand, treated with tar and resin to mimic the appearance of ancient bitumen, and then left to cure for a few years before being dug up and sold as the real thing. The deception was so widespread that even famous physicians of the time complained about the poor quality of the mummia available. From our modern perspective, the ethical horror is overwhelming. These were human beings once prepared for an eternal journey with immense care and spiritual purpose, now being dismembered, pulverized, and consumed as a commodity. It represents a profound cultural disconnect, a time when the mystery of the East was seen not as something to be understood, but as a resource to be exploited. The practice of mummy medicine forces us to confront a difficult question. How can an object of sacred veneration in one culture become a mere curio or a pharmaceutical in another? This dark chapter reveals less about the power of mummies and more about the strange and often brutal paths of human commerce and belief. Walking through a museum hall, you can stand face to face with a person who lived thousands of years ago. This intimate encounter raises a profound and uncomfortable question. Do we have the right to be here? On one side of the debate, the value seems undeniable. Public display allows for a direct, visceral connection to history that a photograph can never provide. Seeing the careful braids in a bogman's hair or the tiny, wrapped form of a Chinchorro child transforms abstract dates into human stories. These exhibits drive scientific interest and public funding for research, which in turn unlocks more secrets about our shared past. For many cultures, especially those like ancient Egypt where no direct descendants are claiming the bodies, display is seen as a form of honor, a way to keep their memory alive in the world. Yet the other side of the argument carries a heavy moral weight. We must ask ourselves if we would find it acceptable if our own grandmother or child were excavated and placed in a glass case for millions of strangers to view. For many indigenous communities around the world, this is not a hypothetical question. The display of ancestral remains is a deep, ongoing trauma. In the United States, the debate culminated in the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, a law that mandates the return of human remains and sacred objects to tribal nations. For these communities, the spirits of their ancestors cannot rest while their bodies are treated as museum specimens. Their belief systems hold that these individuals must be returned to the earth to complete their spiritual journey. This conflict forces institutions to walk a fine line between their educational mission and basic human respect. Some museums have shifted their practices, choosing to display only the sarcophagi and artifacts, while keeping the mummified bodies themselves in a respectful, non-public storage. Others have created more contemplative, dimly lit spaces for such exhibits, framing them not as curiosities but as memorials. The central challenge is one of context. A mummy in a museum is often stripped of its original spiritual meaning and repackaged as an object of science or spectacle. So where do we draw the line? Is it our knowledge that gives us the right, or is it our humanity that demands we step back? This is not a question with an easy answer, but a conversation we must continue to have as we uncover the past. Even the most carefully preserved bodies can carry secrets to the grave. Some mummies present puzzles so baffling they transform archaeologists into detectives, confronting mysteries that our most advanced science has yet to solve. One of the most visceral is the case of the so-called screaming mummy. When this mummy was discovered in a royal cache of pharaohs, its appearance was shocking. Unlike the serene, peaceful faces of other royal mummies, this one's mouth was frozen wide open in a silent scream, its limbs contorted as if in agony. The initial theory was gruesome, that the individual had been mummified alive, perhaps as punishment for a terrible crime. Further investigation, however, suggested a more likely, yet still tragic, scenario. The body showed no signs of being bound, and the posture and facial expression are now thought to be the result of the head falling backward after death, combined with the desiccating effects of the mummification process. But the question remains, who was this person, and why was he buried in such an undignified state? Some Egyptologists now believe this could be Prince Pentawa, a nobleman involved in a harem conspiracy to assassinate the great pharaoh Ramesses III. If the prince was forced to take his own life as punishment, his mummification may have been rushed and botched, leaving behind this haunting, agonized visage as a permanent record of his disgrace. On the other side of the world, in the Manchester Museum, another mystery unfolded around two mummies known as the Two Brothers. These men, Khnum Nakht and Nekht Ankh, were discovered buried side by side in an elaborate tomb from around 1800 BC. Inscriptions clearly identified them as the sons of the same governor, and for decades they were presented to the public as a touching example of ancient siblinghood. Then came modern DNA analysis. When scientists managed to extract genetic material from their teeth, they were stunned. The results revealed that while they shared the same mother, they had different fathers. They were half-brothers at best. This single discovery shattered a long-held family narrative and opened a floodgate of new questions. Was one of them adopted? Was the inscription a political fiction to consolidate power? Or does this reveal a more complex and accepted family structure in ancient Egypt than we previously understood? The two brothers, who shared a tomb for 4,000 years, are now at the center of a debate about the very nature of family in the ancient world. Perhaps the greatest ongoing enigma surrounds one of Egypt's most powerful rulers, the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. She reigned for over 2 decades during the New Kingdom, a prosperous and peaceful time, commissioning magnificent obelisks and a breathtaking mortuary temple. Yet after her death, her monuments were defaced and her name was systematically erased from history, likely by her stepson Thutmose III. For centuries, her mummy was considered lost. Then, in 2007, a team believed they had found her. A single tooth left in a box inscribed with her name was matched to a gap in the jaw of an unidentified mummy found in a minor tomb. The mummy was an overweight, middle-aged woman who had died from a massive infection, likely from a tooth abscess and bone cancer. It seemed the case was closed. Yet not all experts are convinced. The evidence, while compelling, is circumstantial. The match of a single tooth is not as definitive as a DNA test, which has proven difficult due to the degraded state of royal mummy DNA. Could this mummy really be the great female king, or is she another royal, perhaps her wet nurse? The debate continues, a testament to Hatshepsut's own enduring ability to defy easy understanding. These unresolved stories remind us that for all our technology, the ancient dead are not merely subjects for our study. They are individuals, and some of them are still not ready to give up all their secrets. This reverence for the dead extended far beyond humanity. The sands of Egypt conceal a vast, silent kingdom of mummified animals, a practice conducted on an almost unimaginable scale. These creatures were not mere companions, but sacred beings, messengers, and offerings, woven into the very fabric of spiritual life. The most touching examples are the beloved pets buried with their owners to ensure they would be reunited in the afterlife. A nobleman's loyal dog, carefully wrapped and placed at the foot of his sarcophagus. A cat, a cherished family member, mummified with the same care as a human, its tiny form equipped with its own miniature coffin. These animals were eternal companions for the journey beyond, but the practice went far deeper than personal affection. certain animals were considered living manifestations of the gods themselves. The Apis bull, for instance, was worshipped as an incarnation of the god Ptah. This was no ordinary farm animal, it was a divine celebrity living in luxury at a temple complex. When the Apis bull died, the entire nation mourned, and its body underwent an elaborate mummification ceremony rivaling that of a pharaoh, before being interred in a giant stone sarcophagus in a dedicated catacomb. The scale of this devotion becomes truly staggering when we look at the votive offering industry. For the average Egyptian, seeking a favor from a god required a tangible gift. You would travel to a temple dedicated to a specific deity, like the cat goddess Bastet, and purchase a pre-mummified cat. You would then offer this bundle to the priests, who would present it to the goddess on your behalf, carrying your prayer for health, prosperity, or a good harvest. This created an enormous demand. Archaeological discoveries reveal catacombs containing millions of these offerings, stacked from floor to ceiling, corridors filled with mummified ibises for Thoth, the god of wisdom, or crocodiles for Sobek, the water deity. It was a spiritual economy of breathtaking proportions, yet recent technology has cast a surprising light on this ancient practice. Scientists using computed tomography scanners have peered inside these countless bundles, expecting to find complete animal skeletons. Instead, they found a puzzling reality. A significant number of these votive mummies, perhaps as many as 1 in 3, do not contain a complete animal. Some are empty, filled only with reeds, sticks, or mud. Others hold just a few bones, a single leg, or a fragment of skull. This suggests that the temple workshops, struggling to keep up with the immense demand from pilgrims, may have resorted to shortcuts or even outright fraud. Was this a deliberate deception by greedy priests, or was it a case where the symbolic act of offering, the prayer itself, was considered more important than the physical contents of the bundle? This discovery adds a complex human layer to the story, revealing an ancient system under pressure where faith, commerce, and mass production collided. It shows us that even in the sacred science of mummification, the line between profound belief and practical reality could sometimes become beautifully, mysteriously blurred. It was Napoleon's invasion of Egypt at the dawn of the 19th century that truly unearthed the mummy in the Western imagination. His military campaign was a failure, but the scholars and artists he brought with him returned to Europe with breathtaking drawings of pyramids, temples, and hieroglyphs, igniting a wildfire of Egyptomania. Suddenly, every fashionable home wanted an Egyptian revival vase or a scarab brooch. This obsession soon found its way into literature, where the ancient dead were no longer silent artifacts, but potent symbols of a mysterious and dangerous past. Early novels like Jane Loudon's The Mummy presented them not as monsters, but as complex figures who could pass judgment on a modern world they found wanting. The tone was one of Gothic awe, a fascination with the power and knowledge of a lost civilization. This literary curiosity crystallized into pure cinematic terror with the 1932 Universal classic, The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff. Karloff's Imhotep was not a shambling, bandaged brute, but a deeply tragic and menacing figure. The film's opening scene, where a careless archaeologist reads the scroll of Thoth and awakens the ancient priest, is a masterclass in slow-burning dread. Imhotep's quiet intensity, his burning desire for his lost love, and his command of dark magic established the core template for decades to come. The mummy was no longer just a body, it was a vessel for a vengeful, unrequited spirit, a curse made flesh. This creature tapped directly into a societal fear of meddling with forces we do not understand, a warning against the arrogance of science desecrating sacred ground. By the 1950s, the mummy had been resurrected once more, this time by Britain's Hammer Film Productions. In vibrant Technicolor, Christopher Lee took up the linen wraps in The Mummy, portraying a creature of raw physical power. These films amplified the violence and the visceral horror, reflecting a post-war audience's different anxieties. the mummy became a more straightforward force of destruction, an unstoppable engine of vengeance that could punch through doors and crush its victims, embodying a fear of a past that refuses to stay buried, relentlessly hunting the present. Then, at the end of the 20th century, the mummy underwent its most dramatic transformation. The blockbuster The Mummy franchise starring Brendan Fraser completely reinvented the genre. The ancient curse was still there, but it was now wrapped in swashbuckling adventure, witty dialogue, and spectacular special effects. The Mummy Imhotep was still a threat, but the tone had shifted from gothic horror to roller coaster fun. These films reflected a new fascination with archaeology as grand adventure, a global treasure hunt where the past was a playground of ancient magic and comedic mishaps, less a source of terror and more a source of exhilarating spectacle. Most recently, the 2017 Tom Cruise reboot attempted to bring the creature back to its horror roots, while grafting it onto a modern cinematic universe of dark gods and super soldiers. The film's mixed reception highlights a fascinating cultural shift. Perhaps the classic image of a slow-moving, bandaged monster no longer holds the same primal fear for a generation raised on faster, more complex threats. The mummy's changing face is a mirror. In the 1930s, it reflected our fear of the unknown and the consequences of trespass. In the 1950s, it was a brute force of traumatic history. By the 1990s, it became a relic of a more optimistic, adventurous time. So what does our current inability to be scared by the classic mummy say about us? Have we conquered our fear of the ancient past, or have we simply found new, more contemporary monsters to take its place? Could we recreate an Egyptian mummy today with nothing but ancient methods? A team of researchers decided to find out, embarking on a remarkable scientific journey to test the legendary power of natron. They worked with a donor who had willed their body to science, placing it in a bed of the same natural salt used along the Nile. The goal was not to perform the full 70-day ritual, but to isolate the dehydration phase, the very heart of the preservation process. For 35 days, the body lay submerged in the salt, replicating the conditions of an ancient workshop as closely as modern ethics would allow. The results were both startling and revealing. The natron worked exactly as the ancients claimed, drawing out moisture with ruthless efficiency. The body lost nearly half its weight, becoming desiccated and leathery, a clear success for the core preservation technique. Yet the experiment also highlighted the immense skill of the original embalmers. Without their precise knowledge of how to position the limbs and pack the body cavity to maintain its shape, the modern recreation took on a somewhat distorted form. This was not a failure of the science, but a demonstration of the lost art, the subtle hands-on expertise that transformed a dried shell into an eternal vessel. The legal and ethical landscape for such an experiment is a modern maze. Using a human body for anything other than burial, donation to medicine, or cremation requires immense oversight and explicit donor consent. The very idea of mummification challenges our contemporary norms about the treatment of the dead, forcing a confrontation between archaeological curiosity and profound respect for human dignity. This scientific inquiry leads us directly to a modern equivalent, a 21st century preservation phenomenon. The practice of plastination, famously used in exhibits like Body Worlds, shares a similar goal with the ancients to cheat decay and reveal the inner workings of the body. But the methods and motivations are a world apart. Where the Egyptians used natural salts to dry the body, plastination uses reactive polymers to replace water and fat within the tissues. The result is not a brittle, desiccated form, but a flexible, odorless, and permanent specimen. The ancient Egyptian process was a sacred act, a spiritual necessity to create a home for the soul. Plastination is an educational tool designed for anatomical study and public enlightenment. One was meant for the afterlife, the other for the living. Both, however, stand as powerful testaments to our enduring desire to conquer time, to hold onto the physical form and learn from it long after the spark of life has faded. One was a prayer for eternity, the other is a lesson in biology, yet both ask us to look at the human body and see something more than mere flesh. The very ice that has protected mummies for centuries is now turning against them. A silent crisis is unfolding from the Arctic to the desert, as the planet's changing climate begins to erase these irreplaceable windows into the past. Perhaps the most urgent threat is in the far north, where the ancestral remains of the Inuit people are emerging from a deep freeze that has lasted for generations. For hundreds of years, the permafrost, the permanently frozen ground, acted as a perfect natural freezer, cradling bodies in a state of perfect preservation. But now, with global temperatures rising, this permafrost is melting at an alarming rate. As the ground softens and thaws, these ancient mummies are being exposed to warmth and moisture for the first time, and the process of decay, halted for so long, has suddenly begun. These are not just archaeological specimens, they are the direct ancestors of modern Inuit communities, and their loss is a profound cultural tragedy. The thaw also unlocks a more speculative yet deeply concerning possibility. Locked within the frozen tissue of these ancient remains could be long-dormant pathogens, viruses, and bacteria that modern medicine has never encountered. While the risk of a catastrophic ancient plague is considered low by scientists, the potential exists. It is a stark reminder that the past is not always a safe place, and that disturbing it can have unintended consequences for the present. The threat is not confined to the icy realms. In the desert tombs of Egypt and the arid burial chambers of coastal Peru, a different climatic enemy is at work: rising humidity. For millennia, the hyper-dry air in these regions was the primary agent of preservation, creating a stable environment where organic material could survive for thousands of years. Now, shifting weather patterns and increased moisture in the atmosphere are disrupting this delicate balance. Inside sealed tombs, the humidity level is creeping upward. This seemingly small change is catastrophic for a mummy. The introduced moisture rehydrates the desiccated tissues, creating the perfect conditions for mold, fungi, and bacteria to finally take hold and begin consuming what time could not. A mummy that survived intact for 4,000 years can now succumb to decay in a single generation. This creates a desperate race against time for archaeologists and conservators. They are no longer just excavators, they are first responders, working to stabilize these artifacts before they are lost forever. The fight to save these ancient bodies is a powerful symbol of a much larger struggle. It connects the fate of our deepest history directly to the most pressing global issue of our time, proving that the choices we make today will echo not only into the future, but also determine what remnants of the past will remain for the generations to come. From the sacred rituals along the Nile to the frozen summits of the Andes, our journey reveals a universal human truth. Cultures across the globe, separated by vast oceans and millennia, all arrived at the same profound conclusion. They refused to accept that death was a final end. Mummification was their answer, a breathtakingly diverse testament to the human spirit. It was a practice of love in ancient Chile, a political statement in imperial China, and a sacred duty in the deserts of Egypt. These preserved individuals are far more than the movie monsters of popular fiction. They are time travelers, each one a unique window into the world they once knew. Through them, we learn about ancient diseases and diets, social hierarchies and family bonds, artistic genius and spiritual longing. They show us the incredible lengths our ancestors would go to honor their dead, to remember their loved ones, and to secure a place for themselves in the universe beyond this one. The desire for immortality, to leave a mark that time cannot erase, is a thread that connects all of humanity, past and present. Thank you for exploring these eternal mysteries with us. We would love to hear which story resonated most with you. Share your favorite mummy discovery or your own thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to continue unraveling the greatest puzzles of our past.